What's up, YouTube? I know it's been a minute. We're back in the Subaru. A lot's been going on. Finally getting back to a little bit of more poker. Took a bit of a break. Tail end of COVID. I started playing again. Started running bad. Wasn't doing very well. Had some other stuff and investments that were going well. And so took a little bit of break. Now that those things aren't going so great, got to get back to the grind, playing a little bit more poker. One of the things that I had realized was I just stopped enjoying making the YouTube videos because it became a bit of a chore. Obviously, when I started this channel, I started it way back when, actually, literally, I think a day after Owen did. He and I, being friends, kind of had a similar thought that we wanted to share a little bit of our lives, have a creative outlet instead of just grinding poker, inspired by Neeme, who had a really cool vlog and was being different, wasn't just doing hand histories. And so those early days of YouTube, I really enjoyed because I got to share my story, share the children, and talk about my life. But unfortunately, the meta kind of became such that everybody loved hand histories. That's all they wanted. And you kind of become a slave to the numbers. You want to be successful on YouTube. You give the people what they want. And what they wanted was to hear you talk about poker. And so a lot of the videos began to just center around that, and I didn't enjoy it as much anymore. So I'm going to try to kind of start making some videos again. I have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe I'll put a lot of videos out. Maybe I won't. But the plan is to kind of just detail life, have it not just be about poker, and not really worry about the views. Chances are I'm not going to be getting many views anyway because I haven't put out much content, and the YouTube algorithm usually doesn't push stuff out unless you've been making videos regularly. So I'm sure I won't be getting many views, but that's okay because the idea originally was to share my life, have some videos for my children to look back at. And if you look back at like the last couple of years of YouTube, they kind of were pulled out because I literally had people leaving comments being like, get to the hand histories, I don't want to see your effing kids, I don't care about them. Which kind of goes to show you what the YouTube comment section can look like. So anyway, we're on the way to play today. Probably going to be playing some 2-5-10. I'll probably detail that session a little bit. Otherwise, life's been great. Kids are growing up. I'll probably post some videos or photos up to kind of show you how the boys are doing. They just turned 7 and 4, which is crazy because when I started this channel, I think it was about a year into having Charlie. As I mentioned, the original thought behind creating the channel was to share what it was like being a dad in poker. And so I'm going to try to do that a little bit more once again. Anyway, about to hit the casino, so we will get into some hands from this session after that. As you can likely tell, it's been a few days since the last video. In fact, possibly even a week. A lot's been going on. I've played two more times since then. I think I ended up winning something like 350 in the day after, and then maybe another 150 the day after that. But I wanted to recount the session right after the last video was taking place. I had a lot of interesting hands in that session, pretty swingy and wild. So let's jump right into those hands. In the first one, there's an open to $40. We're playing 3, 5, 10. I forget now if we're doing winner kills or if we're doing a $10 under the gun straddle, but pretty much just the same. So there's an open to 40 from a reg, a couple of callers. I'm in the small blind with queen 10 of diamonds. Obviously being out of position here isn't great, but I don't like folding. I like playing pots, and so I call, and I believe we go 4 ways to a flop, which comes 5-3 deuce rainbow. I check, obviously not hitting anything here. The pre-flop opener bets 100. We get 2 folds, and I think, in fact, maybe there was 5 of us to the flop, so maybe it's about a half pot bet. I think his range here looks just a lot like overpairs. Sure, he could just be stabbing here with ace king high, knowing 5-3 deuce isn't going to hit too many people, but just the same, I think he's going to expect that hands like pocket 8s, pocket 9s are just never going to fold. So I think he's actually going to check here a lot and not just start lighting money on fire with like 2 overs and a gutter if he has like ace king or ace queen high. I'm actually mid-conversation with another player to my right, and I just kind of immediately notice, or it hits me pretty quickly, that this is obviously a very bad board for his hand multi-way. Like I said, I think we went 5 ways to the flop because there is one person still to act behind me, but I think it's just going to be really hard for him to continue here with hands like 10s plus. Maybe aces can continue because it does in fact have a gut shot, but I think that if I do put in a check raise here, likely he may call once, but facing multiple streets of aggression, it's going to be really hard for him to continue. So kind of being mid-conversation and then suddenly paying attention to the hand, I think helps drive the narrative that this is a good flop for my hand. So I ended up making it, I think, like 230 or 240, a little bit more than a min raise. Obviously, I'm going to be doing this with a lot of really good hands, like sets of 5s, 3s, 2s, hands that don't need to make it too large, because if I do, in fact, think he has overpairs, obviously we don't want to make it too much, because if we make it too much, he's going to easily fold. We want him to continue with these hands. So I make it 230. I think the big blind folds, and now he pretty much snap mucks, and when he mucks, accidentally his cards flip over, and we see that he had 2 jacks. Obviously, when this happens, I really can't help showing the bluff here, especially against a reg where we can create some fun dynamics. So I show the bluff, the whole table kind of erupts, which potentially sets up some fun dynamics going forward, given that the game had been playing fairly tight up until this point. But yeah, we picked that pot up and, got people on their toes. In this next hand, I am the $10 kill with 10-4 offsuit. The game's been playing pretty nitty. There's an open to 20. There's a couple of players who have been doing these min raises in these straddle pots. I don't really like it. I'm not sure the strategy behind it. I think if you're going to make it 20, you might as well limp. Maybe the idea is that people are less likely to 3-bet a $20 open than raise to a larger sizing if you limp for 10. I have to assume that's the thought process, but still, I'd rather just be opening my good hands and not trying to open to 20 with like suited connectors or pocket pairs. I think if you're splitting your range here, it's kind of silly. But anyway, I decided to call 10 more with 10-4 off, which I don't love. Generally speaking, I just fold to these min raises with bad hands, but probably just a bit bored and looking to mix it up. I call 10 more. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes king 8-3 with 2 hearts. Obviously, I just completely whiff and have nothing. And it checks through. When it checks through, my read is just nobody has anything here. That's just what I can tell, that I don't think anybody has a king. And facing some serious aggression, I don't think, across multiple streets, I don't think anyone's going to be able to call it down. So I have at 60 on the turn, which is an offsuit 5. The only real draw that picks up here is like 6-7 and 4-6. So anyway, I make it 60, and now the player to my immediate left calls a 60. Everybody else folds, and the river is an 8, which actually I think is a pretty good card. Obviously, he could be calling the turn bet with second pair, but given that second pair is what hit, it's less likely. Obviously, I could be betting second pair, so if he has a king, this is theoretically a bad card for him. And there's a ton of missed draws, which maybe the argument against missed draws is that I could be betting smaller. I don't really need to be going larger, because all missed draws are folding to small sizings. You actually see Alan Keating do this a lot on the recent Hustler Casino live games, where when draws miss and he has just a complete airball that he bluffed on the turn, on the river, he bets a much smaller sizing because the draws are just going to fold against sizings, and value hands aren't really going to fold to him for any sizings. Anyway, so I look at the player stack. I think he has like 180. I decided to bet 140, and I think $100 just does the exact same thing. I don't need to be betting 140. Could save myself $40. Unfortunately for me, he snaps me with queen 8 offsuit for rivering trips. Can't remember now if I said that the river was an 8, but the river's an 8. And so obviously never getting him to fold this hand. I think he potentially folds an 8 on all the cards that don't make him 2 pair or better. The question is am I bluffing on certain rivers that bring a flush? I'm not really sure. I don't recall now at the time what I put him on, but I didn't think he was particularly strong. So against some river straightening or flush cards, potentially I give up anyway and lose the pot. But obviously my fault here for mixing it up. I don't need to be getting involved with 10-4 off, despite thinking that nobody really has anything. Showing the queen 10 from earlier potentially makes it such that I have an awful image in the game, and probably a pretty good reason why he decided to call me with second pair here, facing like 3/4 pot. I think if I didn't show the queen 10, given that there's still people that act behind him, he probably just folds second pair. So womp womp. Obviously a number of mistakes in this hand. After that hand, I have a series of just kind of raise and folds, call and folds, in which I think I end up getting stuck somewhere between 600 and 800. The game is just nitty. No one's really playing any hands, which obviously you can win small pots, but the bigger ones, they just tend to have it. And so I look back and notice that the table behind me is just a much better game. It is playing bigger. There are people who are just much wilder. So I decided to get a table change. And when I table change the first hand, they tell me that they're playing under the gun straddle. I'm under the gun, so I straddle for $10. There are like 3 or 4 limpers, and now the small blind makes it 95. The small blind is one of the biggest action players. He's a guy who I guess has done well in life and just likes to come to the casino and have a good time. And so I like to give him action. More importantly, I think he's doing this really wide. The big blind, who is a player I've never seen, but my read was he was another one of the action players. I believe everyone's joking that he was all in and lost like twice in the first 3 hands. And so when he calls the big blind here, I also think he's extremely wide. Obviously, Queen Jack suited doesn't do that well against calling ranges. You're going to be having hands like King Queen, Ace Queen. But I didn't come here to fold. We're ready to gamble. And so I guess in that case, you might want to argue that just 3-betting here pre-flop is better. The problem is that the player in the big blind is only playing, I think, like 450 behind. And so if he's only playing 450 behind, like, am I willing to get in 550 pre-flop here against him with Queen Jack? I don't love it. I decided gamble and call 85 more, probably the worst of my 3 options. I think if I'm going to play the hand, I should just be 3-betting against the 1K deep small blind. Maybe the big blind just folds here if I decide to make it like 350. Maybe he has a hand like Ace-10 offsuit and just decides like, okay, he can call 100, but he can't call 500. So that's probably my preferred play. Unfortunately, I did not do it. So I end up calling. Everybody else folds, which is pretty surprising. And we go 3 ways to a flop, which comes 7-5 deuce with 2 clubs. Obviously, pretty much the nut flop for my hand. 2 overs and a flush draw. I just have to hope that neither of these 2 players have a hand like Ace-10 of clubs, Ace-King of clubs. So the small blind player, who I think is going to be just continuing here very wide, obviously with like his Ace-King high hands, over pairs as well, bets 200. The player in the big blind just calls, leaving himself 250. Not really sure what he's doing here. I think any hand that he's going to flat with, he should just be jamming. Obviously, he doesn't have any fold equity. And so maybe what he wants to do is just call to get me to overcall so that he has better odds with his flush draws, because obviously if he hits his flush, he would much rather there be more money in there because he's still just drawing with ace high. So anyway, so he just calls. Obviously, I'm going to try to isolate against the big blind, hoping that my queen and jack are alive against God knows what he has in the big blind. And potentially we can get the small blind to fold here, his ace high hands. Like I said, he's very wide. I don't think he has to have pairs here. He could just have a number of hands. So I end up jamming for, I believe, 780 more. And now goes on the small blind, who tanks for a bit of time, maybe like a minute, not that long. He ends up calling it off. And now, obviously, the big blind kind of snaps off the extra 250. And when the big blind calls, he ends up looking at me and saying, "Queen high is no good." And I look at him, I'm like, what? What? Like, and then he kind of quickly after that says, like, "Oh yes, I've had queen high a lot, and it's never good." And I'm like, I don't know if you saw my hands. Obviously, I think anybody watching this video is probably going to comment and say that he must have seen my hand. The thing is I'm in the 9 seat and he's in the 8, and I usually look at my cards to the left of my stack, so I don't think there's any way he could have seen my hand. So potentially, like, he's just making a joke if he indeed got stacked twice with queen high previously. Yeah, just really weird. The turn is an ace, obviously a really bad card, because now I'm much less likely that the queen and the jack are live for overcards. The river is a brick, so we don't make a flush. We have queen high. The big blind shows ace-10 of clubs, so we're pretty dead against that hand. We needed to hit a queen or a jack and not a club to scoop the main pot. And then the small blind has pocket nines, so we whiffed our 2 overs and flushed against him, which would have broken us even for the pot, because I think with the side pot I actually would have won a little bit. So it would have still been nice to have sucked out versus him. We lose that hand, and now I think we're stuck for maybe like 17 or 1800. So pretty rough first hand for the table change. This hand isn't particularly interesting, but it's gonna be a detail in the session that kind of lets me know how I start working back the stack. There is an open, I think it's like 35 or 40, a couple of callers. I'm in the small blind and call with ace-3 of diamonds. Again, position matters. Isn't a great spot to be calling with this hand, but I'm stuck. I'm gonna be gambling. I like calling with these ace-x suited type hands because we're trying to overflush people. So I call, and we go, I think, like 4 or 5 ways to a flop, which comes king high with 2 diamonds. I think it comes like king 10-8 with 2 diamonds. Checks through. The turn is like the jack of diamonds, so I make the nuts. And now I decided to just bet, obviously trying to target some 2-pair hands, potentially overflush somebody. I don't think we want to be playing coy here, trying to check and check raise somebody. I think it's just best to bet your hands. People who are going to have equity are going to continue. People who have good hands like sets and 2-pair are going to continue. So I bet 100, and now one of the early limpers jams for like 550, folds back to me. I obviously just turn my hand over and snap. And he pretty much like immediately goes to muck, saying that he turned a flush as well. So pretty lucky there to overflush somebody and win, I think, something like $650. Now, at this point, I realized that our table actually has a girl whose name is Jamie that joined. She recently played a few times on Hustler Casino Live. In those games, she was pretty wild. I actually didn't realize this was her, despite hearing what her name was, because I thought she looked a little different and just obviously was acting very different because she wasn't drinking. So in this particular hand, I get pocket queens. I open to 35. She calls, 2 other callers. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes 6-6-3 with 2 clubs. Obviously a very good flop for my hand, having 2 overs. No one should really have 6 here, unless it's like some 6-7, 6-5 suited. And obviously people are going to have club draws. She had just recently made a ace-high call down in a spot where the board ended up putting a full house on the board, and the guy was just like bluffing with like 6 high and ended up getting the chop. So she's obviously willing to mix it up and willing to make some like call downs. Like, she knows what she's doing at a poker table. I bet 75, which is about half pot. She calls, the other 2 people fold. The turn is a deuce, bringing in the 4-5 straight. Obviously not the best card in the deck for my hand, but still there are some flush draws. I decided to check because I think she has any value hands. She's just going to bet them. She's going to bet her bluffs. I look like I could have a lot of ace-x hands, so I think it's just a really good spot to check and let her start bluffing. She only has, I think, like 450, so I think that if I check and she bets, I have an easy jam. So I check, and she almost instantly bets 200 of her 450. I think when she bets just like this quickly without thought, I almost always just have the best hand. I think a hand like 4-5 or 6 maybe puts on a little bit more of a Hollywood. So I jam, and she pretty much snaps. I turn my hand over. River is, I don't even remember what the river was, but I don't think it completes any other straights or flushes. And she ends up claiming after with the chit pocket 10. So yeah, a bit cooler, obviously flopping an overpair with only like 50 big blinds deep, given that we're playing 3-5-10. So we won another pot and inching back towards even. Now, in this next hand, there is a reg who's on the button who opens to 40 after a limp. He now shows his hand to Jamie, who is next to him. And I think this hand kind of illustrates an interesting point about showing hands to your neighbors. I think it's kind of a negative free roll. Sometimes, you know, bad things can happen as a result. You're just kind of giving more information to somebody else at the table who maybe will make a face or do something weird. So I just generally don't like to do it. And it actually ends up coming into play in this specific hand. So he opens to 40. The, I think, big blind calls. I call 30 more out of the kill with king 10 suited. The limper calls as well. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes ace, jack, 3 with 2 clubs. The big blind checks. Obviously here with just a naked gut shot, I'm going to be checking and probably just folding to aggression depending on bet sizing, but without backdoor spades, there's nothing I can really do here. I check, the player after me checks, and now the button checks back. I think that, so in this specific instance, when he showed his hand to Jamie next to him, she ended up making some joke about him having some like bad hand, or she's like something like, oh, you're playing that? And then he kind of, I made a joke, oh, it's that bad? And he's just like, he shakes his head. And it kind of gives me the read that he, in fact, isn't that strong pre-flop, like that he has some speculative hand, right? It's not something like ace king or ace queen. Like, my read is that she wasn't joking about him opening some wide range of hands. So he checks back the flop. And thankfully for me, the turn is the miraculous offsuit queen, giving me the nuts. The big blind checks. I now bet 65, which is about a little under half pot. Obviously looking to get some action. I don't expect the button to have a very strong range, given that he checked this back. Hopefully, you know, I can get someone to maybe make a play at the pot. Anyway, so I bet 65. The player after me folds. The button now calls. When he calls here, I think it's actually pretty interesting. I think that his hands, you know, look like flush draws, but I would expect flush draws to be betting this flop. So I'm not really exactly sure what range of hands I think he has here. I'm kind of lost, actually, because I would expect him on an ace-high board to just be betting this flop. Maybe he has a hand like king-jack, king-queen, something that picked up like second pair in a gut shot. The big blind now check raises to 250. Cat's out of the bag. I think he has a very good hand here with a flush draw being present and a lot of two pairs, things like that. I'm not going to be slow playing the hand. I can't really just flat here. So I end up making like 1,000, looking to get it all in against what I expect to be a strong range here from the big blind. The button folds and the big blind calls and says he needs to pair the board. Thankfully for us, the river is a 6 of clubs, not pairing the board. But the player on the button, the reg, ends up saying that he would have made a flush. And the reason he checked it back was because of the fact that she kind of made it obvious that he didn't have like a strong range here pre. So it made it such that on like, you know, an ace jack high board, he doesn't really just want to start barreling. So he decided to disguise the strength of his hand, which ended up being very fortunate for me because if he bets this flop, I assume the set of threes just check raises the flop and I never get to see the turn. So I got really lucky here and ended up scooping a fairly large pot. Now for the final interesting hand of note, there is a limp pot. I think there's like 2 or 3 limps to me on the button. I limp with pocket sixes. We go, I think 5 ways to a flop, which comes ace, queen, 6, rainbow. It's beautiful. Checks to me. Obviously, I'm just not a fan of slow playing here. I'm going to be betting a wide range on the button. And so I'm just going to be betting here. There are some gut shots present. So I bet 25 into, or sorry, I end up betting, I think 25 into like about probably $50. The small blind, who is an active player, calls. And now the big blind makes it 80. When he does this, just having played with him, like I know it's a strong value hand. Obviously, I block the 2 pairs, but I just still think it's exactly 2 pairs. I think it's ace queen, ace 6 or queen 6. Obviously, ace queen's pretty unlikely given he's a big blind. I think that people are still going to open this hand out of their big blind, so I still think it's more likely to be ace 6 or queen 6. So when he does this, I'm not going to be slow playing. Obviously, I can, but I think the small blind has some gut shots here. I think those are the most likely hands given board coverage, the fact that I've got the bottom set. I think this guy is 2 pair. I think that the most likely hands for the small blind to have, maybe there's some like ace X hands, but I think it's just more likely to be something like 10 jack, king 10, I think what is it, king jack for all the gut shots that are getting a good price. So I don't want to give him a good price here in what is a great spot, like playing, I think he had over $1,000, playing over 1,000 deep with a gut shot, or if he can spike the 4-outer, he knows he's up against some really strong ranges. So I just make it 250. The small blind folds, and the big blind, sure enough, ships in his $600. We obviously have an easy snap here. I had to think for a moment because I thought like maybe he limped under the gun, and so I'm like, wait, does he have a bigger set? But obviously I'm never folding, so I call it off and tell him I have a set, and he's like, oh really, I have 2 pair. We end up getting a clean run out. The small blind ends up saying, and he's a guy that likes to talk a lot, so he ends up saying that if I just call, I stack him, because he said he had ace 8. I'm assuming that turn was an 8. I don't really remember. But, you know, whether he's being honest or not, I'm not really sure. Like I said, I think he's a guy that likes to say things like this a lot, so I think it's quite possible he's just kind of trying to say that to needle me. But anyway, we end up scooping that pot, and we go all the way from, like, stuck 2K to winning a little over $1,100. Really solid, a nice little 3K upswing from just being stuck guaps. Didn't play well in the beginning, but got rewarded making a bunch of big hands. And, you know, at the end of the day, rather be lucky than good, right? That's all for the session review. As I said, the 2 sessions right after that, I ended up winning like 300 and another 100 and something. Things have been good. Just kind of been spending time with the family. I'm going to try to put out some more hand history and life updates on the channel because YouTube threatened to demonetize me, and I don't want to lose my monetization. Not like I'm really making any money from it, but I did work hard to kind of get it to this point. So that's all for now. Let me know what you guys are, interested in. Maybe I could do some podcasts with people or talk to somebody about something. I don't know. I'm open to doing different things on this channel because the hand histories just aren't as exciting to me anymore as they used to be. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video. How are you doing, Ben?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Did you have a good day today?
Yes, and a beat.
I love you.